So again, this is Ridiko, and we'll be talking about malaria vector, mosquitoes, and the control. I understand we might not be able to go through the whole slides, so I'll walk you through the important things with this presentation, and then the remainder I'll just give you the slides, and you'll be able to and references to be able to read and understand the remainder components of the study of the presentation. So when we're talking about the malaria vector, we mainly mean the mosquito. And immediately, I just want to show you how effective these mosquitoes have, and the structures that they have that they facilitate their capacity to transmit diseases. So the next slide is going to be a video, which I hope you'll be able to appreciate how sophisticated the mosquito is.
This is the deadliest animal in the world. Mosquitoes kill hundreds of thousands of people each year. The most vulnerable people, children, pregnant women. No other bite kills more humans or makes more of us sick.
So various species exist
So what
that
makes
cause
the
different
mosquitoes' bite so effective?
diseases.
For starters, they're motivated. Only females bite us. They need blood to make eggs. And a pool of water for their babies to hatch in. Even a piece of trash can hold enough. At first glance, it looks simple, this mosquito digging her proboscis into us. But the tools she's using here are sophisticated. First, a protective sheath retracts. See it bending back? If you look at a mosquito's head under a microscope, you can see what that sheath protects. And inside there are 6 needles. 2 of them have tiny teeth. She uses those to saw through the skin. They're so sharp, you can barely feel her pushing. These other 2 needles hold the tissues apart while she works. From under the skin, you can see her probing, looking for a blood vessel. Receptors on the tip of one of her other needles pick up on chemicals that our blood vessels exude naturally and guide her to it. Then she uses this same needle like a straw. As her gut fills up, she separates water from the blood and squeezes it out. See that drop? That frees up space to stuff herself with more nutritious red blood cells. With another needle, she spits chemicals into us. They get our blood flowing more easily and give us itchy welts afterwards. And sometimes, before she pries herself away, she leaves a parting gift in her saliva. A virus or a parasite that can sicken or kill us. There's nothing in it for her. The viruses and parasites are just hitching a ride. But this is what makes mortal enemies out of us and mosquitoes. They take our blood. Sometimes we take theirs. But often not soon enough. Good, you're still there. These are the larvae of Culex pipiens, aka the common house mosquito.
So from this context, you would be able to appreciate that the parasites that are within the mosquitoes get through across a very complex mechanisms. So as an outline, we'll have an introduction, classification, morphology, life cycle, and geographical distributions of different species of mosquitoes, which are vectors for the malaria. And mainly the female Anopheles mosquitoes are the ones that are capable of transmitting malaria or other human diseases. And different species have been known to be vectors based on different parts of the world. So for example, Anopheles gambiae complex is a chief vector for transmission in Africa. And Anopheles friboni is mostly in North America, and nearly 45 different species of mosquitoes have been found in different places, including India. And the major vector for sub-Saharan Africa is Anopheles gambiae. And typically Anopheles life cycle is complex, but they would they prefer to live and feed around humans. And this is important partly because when you're talking about the preference of feeding of mosquitoes, whether they like to feed more on humans, which is known as anthropophilic, or they love to feed on animals, which is known as zoophilic, or they like to feed on both, is going to determine the transmission capacity of the mosquitoes. So also what matters is where do they like to lay their eggs, or preferred oviposition sites, whether they like to lay their eggs in small temporary pools, or they like to, lay the eggs on rainy water flowing rivers, or when they like to lay the eggs on salt water or not. So mosquitoes are usually within the animal kingdom, phylum Arthropoda, insecta class, dipteras, and there could be different species, whether Anopheles gambiae, for example. This is what we're discussing tonight. So among the huge important transmissions of some of the most significant medical diseases, including malaria, it's the most important parasitic disease of man. And for example, in 2020 reports more than 230 million suffer from malaria, leading to deaths of more than 400,000 people every year. Diseases like dengue, yellow fever, lymphatic filariasis, all these are important diseases that are transferred by mosquitoes. So this is an image of Anopheles gambiae. And is this a major malaria vector in sub-Saharan Africa? And it prefers areas of high humidity. It bites and rests indoors. It's highly anthropophilic tendencies in terms of it loves to eat more from human beings than animals. And this is why malaria is mostly efficiently transmitted in Africa, because in other places you could have species of mosquitoes that like to feed on other species other than human beings, like maybe monkeys or cows or things like that. This is important. And female mosquitoes, as you've seen in the video, they eat only when they're pregnant. So other male mosquitoes, they would feed on nectar and flowers, nectar from flowers and other places other than blood. So the most efficient ones are the pregnant female mosquitoes. The other species like Arabiensis, which are widespread, but in more drier areas than Gambiae. And these ones might like to bite and rest outdoors. And these may have zoophilic tendencies, meaning they can also feed on cattle. And feeding on cattle helps them to survive without depending on human beings. But it's important when you clear species of mosquitoes that eat mostly human beings, these ones might thrive more. There's Anopheles funessus complex, which they prefer more or less permanent habitats, and in swamps and marshes, they like to stay in shaded habitats. They bite at night and mostly indoors, and they rest indoors. This is important where the mosquitoes bite and rest, because it's going to affect how you're deciding on the malaria control strategy. So if you have mosquitoes that eat or that bite you indoors and rest indoors, that means if you spray your indoor residual spraying on the walls, or your mosquito sprays, you would kill the ones that like to bite indoors and rest indoors. But if there are species like to bite indoors and rest outdoors, these strategies of controlling indoors are not going to be efficient. Especially, you might be able to use mosquito nets, because if they like to bite indoors, then you prevent them. But if these mosquitoes like to bite outdoors, for example, and rest outdoors, then even if you're going to have a mosquito net, the efficiency is going to be low because these mosquitoes will bite you when you're out for a drink at night or you're walking outside, than when you're inside and transmit the infection. So this in terms of vector biology is quite necessary to understand. In the life cycle, you have the adults, they can lay eggs, and then they give larva. The larva develops pupa, pupa develops into adults, adults go again in the cycle. And along this cycle, when they emerge as adults here, they would tend to immediately go and mate. When they immediately go and mate immediately after emerging as adults, that's when the females get pregnant, and then they would go and bite you and connect to the human life cycle of parasites, as I had previously just shared with you. All right, and then they would lay eggs, and then they would continue. So each blood meal, they give the parasites ability to nutritionalize one batch of eggs between 30 to 150 eggs. Another important fact to remember, especially Anopheles females, they would only have sex once in their life cycle. And when they, after having sex once, they would get pregnant, and they would have sperms that would remain in their cycle that will be fertilizing eggs. But every time they would need a blood meal to fertilize different batches of eggs. And this is an important thing, because if you create sterile mosquitoes, male sterile mosquitoes, which they would have sex with the mosquitoes, or the female mosquitoes only once and not make them pregnant, you will be able to control the population of mosquitoes. And this way, it will be easier for you to clear the parasites, the vectors that will be distributing the parasites. And then, not all mosquito species feed on man, as I mentioned before, and mosquitoes can transmit these diseases. And then long period of evolution means that mosquitoes is not affected by carrying or transmitting these parasites, because they're also known as vectors. They can transmit without being sick themselves. The life cycle of mosquitoes has these distinct stages that I've mentioned: the egg, larva, pupa, and adult. And time taken depends on various factors. Time taken for various stages to develop depends on temperature and nutritional factors. You have to listen to me here. This is important, because when the mosquito is developing in a place where there is harsh temperature and low nutrition, it would like to move very quickly from egg to adult, so that it can continue to feed on human beings or animals and reproduce. This means these mosquitoes might end up being smaller, because they've developed faster to sustain the harsh environment. But then if they're smaller, it means they will be feeding more compared to mosquitoes that are larger, or rather that have developed in areas where there's more nutrition and environment is less harsh, which means the number of bites per mosquito are higher in mosquitoes that have grown up in environment that is harsh. Let's say they've developed under puddles of water that is caused by coconut husks, or maybe just temporary water reserves, compared to those who grow mosquitoes which grow in marshes, or where there is pools of water that are much more available throughout the year. So this is an important factor to take into consideration when you're designing your control strategies, to know what are the potential transmission cycles, or how harsh the mosquitoes will be in terms of the biting. So these are the stages. You've seen these ones. The eggs of the female Anopheles mosquitoes, again, they mate only once in their lifetimes. They can spend 2 to 3 days before the next batch of eggs are laid. And the sperms that they had in the one sex, it's going to help them lay several number of batches of eggs. It can be 1 to 3 batches of eggs. Sometimes, depending on type of species, they can live in up to 7 batches of eggs, which these are like 150 to 300 eggs every time they lay eggs, just from one sexual intercourse they've had. The larvae, they feed on things like algae and bacteria, and these larvae develop across 4 instars, and then they become pupa, and then the pupa, these are that dependent on temperature, and they definitely, this is not a feeding stage. They will just wait there and grow, and then they would emerge as adults. And then they would reach, they need 24 hours to reach sexual maturity, and then they would go to mate almost immediately. So this shows the different types of eggs based on species. So for example, Culicines, they usually lay the eggs in a raft, but Aedes, they lay the eggs singly, and others lay eggs with having floaters that they help the eggs to float. This is how you would differentiate different species of mosquitoes based on the eggs. Also, how they would be able to rest on the water surface when they're larvae. Some would have siphons that would, longer siphons in Culex, shorter siphons in Aedes, but Anophelines would not have siphons, and they would just have spiracles, breathing spiracles. And these ones, they would just lay horizontal to the surface of water, while the other ones would lay at an acute angle. These are important differences for you to note, especially when you're trying to differentiate between different species of larvae. So again, the pupa are not any different, but you would notice the difference when they are resting as adults. Culicines will always rest almost parallel. Their body will be almost parallel to the surface where they're resting, while the Anophelines would have an angle of about more than 45 degrees resting angles to the surface that they will be resting on. Right, so this is important for you to know when you're differentiating these mosquito species. Again, so the geographical distribution is widespread, more than 450 to 490 species, but the only mosquito family which transmit malaria is Anophelines, and then there are different complexes, as we've mentioned. All right, so the remaining slides are mainly just geographical distribution of these different species and malaria in Tanzania. This is what, in terms of epidemiology, would have, according to the malaria report indicator survey. Different places have different, prevalence of malaria according to positive for rapid diagnostics tests. This area is much more infected. You would notice that this sort of central corridor is least affected. And this is important because of the climate condition of these areas is not very much favorable of the growth of the mosquitoes, which are efficient vectors. All right, so for now, I'll share with you the slides because I have another class that has to continue to go with. So I'll show you with these slides, but the life cycles and everything that I've done, I've just mainly summarized for you. The disease controls include the blood feeding stage disease to stop mosquitoes from feeding, and you would have long-lasting insect-treated nets. You would need to have also issues related to environmental modifications that are important when you're understanding the biology of the parasites. And of course, you can't ignore that there's a resistance development for the mosquitoes against there's issues like long-lasting insect-treated nets. The malaria mosquitoes, they tend to develop resistance towards these drugs. All right, so we'll pause there for now and ask questions, and then I'll show you the slides and you can study more.